All right, good morning, CUNA. So last night, Ada County, they had a treasury or some kind of investigative report. Like five or six of the Ada County Republican committee higher leadership, they all quit suddenly. There were concerns about how they were handling the money. And so Brian Merrell, he's the chairman of the 23rd of our district, District 23 of the Republican district, Republican side of that. I'm not exactly sure what the words are. So anyway, I haven't watched this video yet. It's about 2 hours long. It happened last night, so I didn't get a chance to review it. So I'll review it with you now. And as usual, we are going to play this back because it might be pretty long at, let's see, we'll do 1.5 speed, and if Brian talks a little slow, we'll speed it up. So here we go.
Good evening. I don't intend to keep you until 9:30, so I appreciate the opportunity to be on the committee, to work with Chairman Mickey McIntyre and with our Treasurer Sue Hoffer. We drew straws. I drew the tall straw, and that's what I'm going to report. At the front table, there were a number of copies of a Financial Review Committee recap. I'm going to read that as my report, which summarizes the findings of the full report. I have a copy, the signed official copy of the full report for the chairman. And right as I walked into the meeting, I sent an electronic copy of a scanned version of that signed report to the chairman and to the secretary, so they have that in their email. As we had talked in a previous setting, and as the motion was made a few months ago, the financial review that we did was responsive to two things. One, to a complaint filed to the state party from members of this body, and two, when the chairman and treasurer resign, it triggers an automatic financial review. Instead of doing two financial reviews, we worked comprehensively to do one review for both, to respond to both needs or both requests, and that's what I'll present here today. So firstly, we were tasked to determine if the original, is that on? I'm not going to put mine has notes. We were tasked to determine if the original complaint from the 17 precinct commitment in the ACRCC was valid. Secondly, to determine the balance in all financial accounts is accurate and reported to the Secretary of State, and what was reported to the Secretary of State was accurate. And third, to provide confidence to the members of this body that the financial records of our organization are being reported correctly. So in our review, 46 findings were identified, specific instances and cases and issues. Many were due to lack of internal controls. And here's a summary of those items. Yeah, you can read that, okay. All right. Firstly, documents are missing from our records, and most official forms were not appropriately signed by the requester or the approver for both for expense disbursements. QuickBooks was not used as intended, meaning that transactions were downloaded from a bank register, resulting in incorrect revenue and expense being recorded on the Secretary to the Secretary of State. I can explain that a little bit more later. Documents are missing. The previous administration scanned some physical documents into computer files and then discarded the originals. Reconciliation documents are also missing from the bank account reconciliations. Antidote fees were not recorded properly or correctly in QuickBooks. They do not match what's been reported to the Secretary of State in most cases, in many cases I should say. Deposits were not timely. Oftentimes checks appear to have been held for months before being deposited, including donations from donors. There are assets, physical assets missing. Inventories of the Western Idaho Fair for 2022 and 2023 were completed. Sales documents for over half of the dates of the fair cannot be balanced with what was recorded as cash or credit card sales. And I understand the previous treasurer, Mr. Bender, has shared with his body the difficulty in tracking fair transactions. But nonetheless, they didn't reconcile, didn't match. Many fiscal policies and procedures were not followed. The bylaws in some cases were not followed. There were 41 of 42 expense transactions for 2022 and 2023 greater than $1,000 with no evidence of a competitive bid. 27 of those totaling $145,000 were in 2022 and 14 in 2023 totaling almost $50,000. Idaho State sales tax was paid on merchandise for resale at the 2023 Western Idaho Fair, unnecessarily or incorrectly. So there was an issue with that. That was something that Mickey McIntyre specialized on or focused on in her part of the review. And then a federal checking account was created in June of 2023. The reconciliation showed transfer of funds from the Mountain West checking account to the FEC. Required filings have not been filed timely. There's an issue outstanding with the FEC that we're trying to resolve related to the opening of that account and the funding of that account. This is not all the findings. This is just a summary of the findings. The full report includes specific details of checks that were written for the wrong amounts or transactions that were reported differently on the Secretary of State website than they were in the books. donors that weren't, checks that were written by donors but that were attributed to different people on the Secretary of State website, things like that. There were 28 recommendations from our committee that are contained in the full report. Here's just a summary of those. Firstly, many of the changes needed, many of the recommendations are for changes needed in the fiscal policies and procedures to implement internal controls. So there were a number of instances where we didn't have a process appropriate to adequately record and account for transactions. The fair would be a good example where we get through the fair by the grace of God, then it's a mess for months and it's unreconcilable. Several of the recommendations are for bylaws changes that need to be incorporated, and also changes to the fiscal, also the need to incorporate fiscal responsibilities of all members. There's we need one of the recommendations to implement a refund policy. There were refunds given that were questionable in nature, and there's no explicit refund policy. It would behoove us to be more explicit with that. The recommendations to issue corrected 1099. The 1099s that we're issuing don't match the expenses. There are very few of those, but they need to be corrected. The recommendation to establish a web presence for the ACRCC. I'm drawing a blank on this one. This is
because we still don't have control of our website.
Okay, so this is because we don't. The body currently does not have access or does not have control of the county party website. That's still in control of the previous chairman. So we have not been able to resolve that issue, and then he's been unwilling to cooperate. So, to my knowledge, the recommendation to file appropriate IRS reports. A 990 report is due for 2022 by March of last year, and the report for 23 is due by March of this year. A recommendation to work with the Idaho Sales Tax Commission to audit payments made. The committee believes that there were incorrect amount of sales tax paid. And then the last one on this summary is a recommendation to follow up with the FEC to clear up incorrect filing documents and take the actions necessary regarding the federal bank account that was set up for the federal expenses for the, what's his name? The Fells Burgess Owens from Utah. So the full report, just a few other comments. The full report we were tasked to review back to the beginning of 2022 to the present. In that, that's not right. From the beginning of 2022 to October 5th, which is the resignation, 5th or 6th, the resignation date of the previous officers. We took into consideration all documents and any documentation that was given to us, electronic, physical assets, correspondence, receipts, everything we could find. We did our best. We did our best to get cooperation from the previous treasurer and the previous officers through their attorney. And the full report is 8 pages with a few additional recommendations afterwards regarding policy stuff. It's not findings from the report. And that is with the chairman, and I believe it will be distributed to the entire membership of this body. But I didn't want to print it out and give it here at this point. It wasn't my place to do. The chairman of our committee asked it, but do it this way. In our report, we do not make any recommendations towards individuals. Specifically, we make recommendations on findings. So it's mostly related to so bylaws, the policy documents, internal controls, protection of personal information, errors that are in the bylaws that haven't been corrected that should be, and then recommendations to shore things up so that we don't violate the bylaws and the policies in the future. With that, I know that leaves some of you wanting more, and some of you had nothing. So I will stand for questions, as long as the chairman will let me. So, do you want me to call on people?
Yeah,
I'm going to have the name, so I'm going to point. Laurel. Yes.
First of all, I want to thank the committee. I know you guys put a lot of time in, so thank you for your time, because this was not time to do paperwork. We appreciate your service. Okay. I had a question. I noticed that during the report that was given previously by the treasurer that she mentioned these refunds, and I noticed that in your recommendations you talk about establishing and implementing a refund policy. Wanted to know if you would speak to the timing of this refund, because I know I've been a member of this committee for a number of years. I've received a lot of annual reports, and I've seen a lot of them. To my best recollection, I don't recall previously an issue where we were giving refunds back to people. And so I wondered if you could speak to, when you as a committee look at this, the timing of these refunds that occurred, and you could speak more directly about that.
I will do my best to answer questions. I did not do all the review by myself. So if it's something that I feel like I have first-hand knowledge of, I'll try to answer and be responsive. If not, then I will not. So the question is a little bit vague, but I'll do my best. There are a few things regarding refunds that come to mind. One is that there was an issue when refunds were issued about how it was reported back to Secretary of State. So if a refund was issued in October of last year, sometimes it's reported in January of last year because that's when the donation was made. And I'm not an expert on the Secretary of State website. There were some things like that that were confusing to me. Right before the resignation of the officers, there was kind of a flood of refunds. Right before our, for example, because we talked about it already, Mr. Clyde was refunded a certain amount in October, and that was for expenses that were generally incurred in May, so that I recall. And he provided some version of documentation, some receipts, some invoices, and then some documents that that weren't sufficient in my opinion. But there seems to be a rush at the end to withdraw, to be reimbursed for expenses in the months of late September and early October. There were refunds along the way, and there were a few smaller refunds that were given to donors. One donor paid twice at the auction and was refunded, the $750 that she accidentally overpaid. So, yes, my comment.
So, did you guys do any analysis on the time lag between when some of the funds were refunded and when they were originally donated? Is there a range?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably over a year on some. Yeah, we looked at, as best we could. We looked at when the donation was made, for what purpose it was made. For most of the refunds, not the reimbursed expenses, but refunds to donors, I would say that in September and October, those were generally for donations that were made for events that had already occurred and that were many months prior to the donation was many months prior to the request for reimbursement.
Follow-on question. Was there any investigation or phone calls to these donors to ask them why, let's say hypothetically, if somebody donated money a year ago, what would motivate them to ask for a refund of their donation?
Yeah, that is not something, I want to read from the full report. I think there's two findings on refunds that are, I'll just read the language. This is all that, I don't know about phone calls because that's not something we were given to review, but there's hearsay, I'm not going to share that from folks in Ada and Canyon counties, but things that we actually saw, there's evidence of, there were refunds made in September and October 2023 by way of the executive board members directly contacting large donors suggesting they ask for their money back. For example, emails from board members to several donors suggest amounts that they should ask for. These emails used similar wording, and the refunds resulted in $10,950. Also, large expenditures were created in September to reimburse executive board members for expenses for May 2023. So in the information that we were provided, we could deduce that much factually. Yes, Megan?
Mr. Merrell, were any of the reimbursements for the receipts that were done, were they not given in May, June, or July, but they were just reimbursed late, they had attached
Repeat the question.
compensation grant?
Would you ask that again? I'm not sure I caught it all.
So you said that for the reimbursements, that the money was given in September, right, September and October, for things that were accrued in May. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was there documentation to coincide with those reimbursements?
Like I said before, in some cases it was sufficient documentation, like a receipt. In other cases it was insufficient, in my opinion. And I personally did review some of those.
And Mr. Merrell, was there any other events or occurrences in the month of August or September that may have been a cause that the people may have looked at as to why people would then withdraw their money?
I don't know, that wasn't part of our review. I do remember that the chairman, I personally remember him threatening that if certain things happened that his donors would withdraw their money.
And did he say why, sir?
If the things happened, then they would withdraw their money. I don't remember the details of it. That's not part of our review, that's just what I remember. So we weren't asked to review that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dave Ritchie, 1760. Not having a copy here of all of your recommendations, I was wondering if you had considered in reviewing and revising the policies and procedures, if you've looked at the publication, I think it's called Accounting Best Practices, and whether or not there's anyone in our group here who might have CPA knowledge and be willing to offer recommendations for one.
Yeah, that's a great question. In the recommendations section, there are a number of policy recommendations related to that. One is to require any new treasurer to receive training in QuickBooks so that they at least have a basic proficiency. There are recommendations to shore up the financial reporting and the financial record keeping. So those are definitely in order. There are accountants in this group. And I'm financial. I know there are folks who have volunteered to help with some of the accounting and bookkeeping. Yes.
Brian, sorry, on that question.
No, you can answer. Sorry. Yes.
Not in particular.
Yes.
You make reference in your sheet
Yes.
to expenses over a certain amount not being subject to open bid.
Yes.
Was there, at the time of those expenses, was there a policy or bylaw in place requiring purchases over a specified amount going through an open bid process.
Yeah, so in 20, I believe it was 2021, the financial pulse, what was it called? 2020 or 2021? 2 summers ago when we were meeting in Star, there was a fiscal policy and procedures document that was approved by the body, almost unanimously, maybe unanimously, and that includes in it the requirement that anything over $1,000. There were a few transactions that we did not include in that total. We did not include in that total that were obviously not biddable. You know, if we had a contract to pay somebody for an employment contract, we don't have to bid that every month. But the transactions that I shared in that summary were the transactions that could have been bid but weren't. At least it appeared as such. Yes, sir.
I'm Mark, 1413. So when we were getting financial reports each month that they were holding deposits back, they were financially lying to us, right? If they held deposits back and didn't show us the deposits on the bank report, wasn't they giving us fraud reports?
So I don't. So that's one way to view it, probably. I think. Let me talk to that.
Can I just address one thing? Because of the sensitive nature of this, we want to make sure that what we say is very careful. So, and we do not want to impugn motive on anything. Rather than saying, were they lying, it would be better to address it as, were these accurate? Because we can't assume that we know what's in anybody's heart at any one moment. So I just want to address that really quick and say this is part of what I was talking about, where we have to be really careful with how we talk about it, because we do not want to create unnecessary angst. Thank you. So yes, so in this case,
so let me talk to a few points that are related to that. So whether or not there was intent, malicious intent to lie, that's not something you can determine by reviewing the financial documents necessarily. The deposits is generally a donation, and so there's no incentive to hold on to a deposit, and there's no incentive to deposit it late, or to report that you raised less money than you did. So I don't think that that's were they accurate? There's lots and lots of instances where specific transaction checks were written for the wrong amount, receipts didn't match what was written, what the check that was written. The donor in SOS, Secretary of State website, it doesn't match the donor in QuickBooks. Donors were combined, donors were separated. It really comes down to just really sloppy bookkeeping, and a disregard for the policies and procedures and bylaws we have in place. So another example, there were 242 expenses or reimbursement requests that did not have a properly signed expense request form or reimbursement request form. So in all of the documents that I reviewed for 2022 and 2023, I personally reviewed, there was one reimbursement request form that had one signature from the submitter, not from the approver, and there was one receipt that had been signed by an approver, but the form wasn't signed. So in all the documents that I reviewed, there was blatant disregard for the process we had in place. There's a lot of excuses and reasons, and there might be some justifications, but when it comes down to it, there were no signatures on any, there was not one form that was properly filled out for a two-year period. So is that malicious? I don't think so. I think it's just lazy or sloppy or ignorant or untrained or whatever you want to call it. So we didn't find money stolen. We didn't find missing money necessarily, as was reported in the report from, we reviewed the Chigbro report. Let me clarify something there. The Chigbro accounting firm was hired without the consent of the body to do an audit that wasn't requested by the body. They reviewed 50 transactions, only 50, that's it, to see if those 50 transactions were recorded properly in the books. In our review, we found one where the totals didn't even match. The amount of the receipts did not match the amount in the books of one of the transactions that Chigbro reviewed. I'm not saying they did a bad job, because you can miss stuff. They did a very small spot check, and yes, of those 50 transactions, they said it was sufficient. And in the end, the previous chairman and treasurer got the bank balances to match by the grace of God. But along the way, there were a lot of paths that went a lot of different directions. And if you go back and read the transactions, which we did as best we could, every transaction, every entry that was a donation or an expense, and every piece of documentation, electronic or paper, you'll understand the findings that we found. Yes.
So to clarify what you just said, auditors normally do a sample of transactions. You didn't do a sample, you looked at every one?
We started with a sample and decided that we needed to review all the transactions from 22 and 23.
So it was 100% review?
We did not. We did a review. Yeah, we did a 100% review. Well, 100% what we had. So yeah. we had everything in the books. We had everything on the SS website, and of the documentation, supporting documentation, probably, and I might be generous, less than 50% had receipts or forms that were filled out properly. So I mean, we can only do so much with what we're doing. So, and I don't think it's malicious. I think it was. Well, I don't know. I'm trying not to pass judgment on one way or the other on anybody who participated. Yes. Actually, Greg was up first. Sorry.
So I have a question about, did the committee address some of the fiduciary responsibilities? So it's my recollection that this body passed a resolution that required us to retain $20,000 in our account in preparation for the upcoming caucus. But despite that mandate from the voters and the members of this body, it does not appear that that was followed. Our accounts were spent below the required minimum that was established by this body at that time, did the committee in their review address fiduciary responsibilities like that?
So I don't think that specific instance is in the report. There was not money set aside. Yes, there was a vote in the minutes to put that, set that aside, and yes, it wasn't regarded, it was disregarded. I will say that this body directed the chairman of the former chairman to pay dues on a monthly basis, and the chairman directed the treasurer, which is documented in writing, to disregard that. He didn't say to disregard. He directed the treasurer to only pay $1,000 in dues, even though we directed the chairman, the body directed the chairman to pay the full amount of the dues monthly. And so that was, the documentation showed that. So that's one example. Another example on the other side is that when we directed the dues to be paid in full to bring us current, the treasurer paid the dues in full to bring us current. And that happened, I think, before the motion to reserve $20,000 for the caucus. And most of the refunds were given after that motion was made. So most of the September, October reimbursements. Yes, Laurel and then Cindy.
So, the reason we do these things is because ultimately we have to make an assessment that when these things happen, okay, what happens to us as a body? What is our risk? And so I noticed that you had made this statement about that there were deposits that sometimes were held for a month or so, okay? And I know the Secretary of State has certain things that require immediate reporting of those things. Time contributions have to be reported, not held for a month and then all reported at the end of the month. I think that I know when I looked at things, I questioned a clump of time contributions that all came in on, I think, January 27th, 2022. So what I'm asking is, as you evaluated this, what kind of risk do we have as a body as a result of this negligence or behavior or whatever we want to call it, that we need to be concerned about whether we're sitting where the Secretary of State might be in a position to come back and find us, or the FEC. And for those of you, I'm not sure everybody knows that's the Federal Election Commission, okay? I want people to understand that level, because I don't know that everybody knew that. What is some of that risk that we now face of potential fines? And I bring it to the attention that we just saw a news article a week and a half ago about a $500,000 fine that was fined against radio stations in regards to the Red Wave radio program that the previous chairman and the previous chairman of the state had, right? So we know some of these like that, what kind of things can be really big fines. And so can you speak to us about what kind of risk we have right now?
Yeah, I'm told I'm not that smart. There's not a lot of oxygen up here. I don't know. The answer is I don't know. I'm not an expert on political consequences of the nature you're talking about. I do know that the consensus of the members of the committee is that the FEC concern is maybe greater than any Secretary of State concern. I know that we've talked to the Secretary of State's office, and they acknowledge that their software sucks, that it was bad and it's a little better now as of this beginning of the year, that there are certain things within their software that cannot be changed. You can't make balances match, and that's just a matter of fact. And I think some of those are resolved in the new build of the software. The Secretary of State's not as concerned with, my understanding is that they're not as concerned as much of who donated as how much was donated. And so if there are errors along the way, I don't think that they necessarily pursue that. I have not done much work with Secretary of State or with the website, but I don't know the legal consequences of sloppy accounting. I don't know some of the consequences of misreporting things accidentally. I think most of this can be resolved. I don't know if there's a ton of risk, but there may be. I'm not sure. Sorry, that's a bad answer.
Can I speak to that a bit?
Yes, only because you're on the committee. Come up here.
So what I wanted to say about the Secretary of State is that until the end of 2023, their major concern was that you had the reports done on a timely basis, and that any donation over $1,000 was reported within 48 hours. The balances, because of so many issues within their own software that they could physically not fix, was something they were not policing. As we go forward in 2024, we don't know how those have changed. And the biggest issue that we saw in 2023 was that there was a lot of corrections that were made to reports in 2023 that ended up convoluting the balances. And ultimately, we could never balance the actual balances on a monthly basis and the end of 2023. So hopefully those have been corrected within your software, but we'll see if they are.
Thank you, Sue. Cindy, you're next.
Yeah, I just want a little clarification on the expense transactions. Like, for instance, you have 27 and 22.
Yes.
And, like, calculating that, I could understand, like, we're in the middle of a rush, you need a lot more tires, we're trying to keep some invoice, and we're not going to do that. But could you kind of categorize that? Like, where was that, what are these expenses that could cost $5,500, which, we're breaking all down? I mean, what's the categories?
I'm sorry, my memory's not that
Were there
good.
any contribution categories?
This is all expenses, so that was all expenses.
And all of them were over 1,000?
So that was
there's several really big ones.
yes, 27 really big ones. Yeah, they were all over 1,000. So that could be that big.
2001, and that we were 144,000 left. So I'm just trying to figure out.
Yeah,
This
I
is a
mean,
huge one.
I think some, I don't know, I probably didn't talk to you, but I think some of them in 2022 were right up at the election. And instead of following our procedures and processes, they jumped in and they just, whoever approved them without getting appropriate bids as is prescribed in our bylaws and financial
So
policies.
quite a bit of publication on it.
Something, yes. Yes, ma'am.
So this sounds like a risky question considering we just heard that the balance was difficult to obtain. But at the time of the resignation of the previous administration, or previous executive board, do we know the balance within our account?
So the treasurer, Sue, remind me, was there a discrepancy?
So when we took over,
I'll tell her what my she told me.
Okay.
But she's taking
we had a
it.
total of $3,420.19
So there's about $3,400 in the bank account when
in November, beginning of November.
when she was given access to the books, and
Previous to that. back in September, there was 33,000.
So the question is, there was a discrepancy between what we were told we had and what we had.
No.
No, I think that the dollar amounts were correct.
But his point proof positive, we asked for the money was $20,000, and that was not done, correct?
They're not 20 grand, yeah, it was $3,400, yeah. That was not set aside reserves. So that motion of the body was disregarded in lieu of other things, which some were expenses and some were reimbursements. I want to close just where I began. At the beginning of this report, now it's all bent. So we were asked or set out to do three things. One, determine if the original complaint from the 17th precinct commitment of this body to the Idaho Republican Party is valid. And our determination of that is that yes, it was found to be valid. In the bigger report, we documented a series of bullet points, 10 or so bullet points, that are findings that validate the concerns of those precinct committeemen. And a report has been sent to the Idaho, well, will be sent after tonight to the Idaho State Republican Party chairman. Oh, it already has been? Okay, so Vicky must have sent it recently. So the second thing is to determine if the balance in all financial accounts is accurate and reported to the Secretary of State accurately. As you kind of gathered from what I've shared, we found that the ACRCC financial records do not match what was filed with the Secretary of State filings. The balance matches, but along the way the transactions don't match. In many transactions, tens of transactions, maybe hundreds, Steve says. Every single purchase at the fair can be recorded as a specific donation, so you get to a lot of transactions. And a big chunk of those that were recorded incorrectly had to do with antidote fees. So when you pay with antidote, there are fees that are applied, and they were applied differently in the books than they were applied on the Secretary of State website. But that was less than half of the transactions that didn't match. The ones concerning to me the most are the ones where donors gave money, and then it was recorded as a different person on the Secretary of State website, or not at all on the Secretary of State website. Or a donor was recorded on the Secretary of State website but isn't in the books. And I don't understand that. I just can't. Maybe that's because of withholding checks for deposits too long and not remembering. I don't know. And then thirdly, to provide confidence to the members of the ACRCC that the financial records of the organization are being reported correctly. That's up to you to determine. I would just say the books, the records, the inventories were found to be not in order, and as a result, rife with errors. And the recommendations that we've made in the full report go a long ways to shore up the policies and procedures, and in some cases the bylaws and training to try and ensure that we as a body follow the processes that are laid out so that A, we can have transparency, and B, we can have accurate record keeping, and C, we can have accurate reporting. With that, I'm done.
Thank you, Brian and team. I really appreciate the work you guys put into this to make sure it was fair and accurate. All right, with the financial review out of the way, let's move on to some other stuff.
Well, that was brutal. All right, let me see. I mean, they mentioned the previous treasurer's speaking. I'm not sure if he thought I saw that. Oh, okay, no. Yeah, I'm not sure if they made any actions that night. Let me just jump through to see if I can pull that
That
up.
Sue is going to have to work with each of the captains, and I would ask the captains to please, as you buy stuff, keep the receipts.
That's funny. All right, let me see what he's talking about here.
Can I address that? Because I continue to give reports from the state's position. We've made a couple of changes. The postcards will not be mailed to every voter. They'll be mailed to every household. That will save us about $40,000. We have $50,000 that is still unbudgeted. That totals $90,000. We have 3 candidate appearance fees in the budget to send back $75,000. My gut tells me we won't see more than one if he comes. We may pocket all $75,000. And if that's the case, we will have lots of money left over to reimburse county expenses. That means that Sue is going to have to work with each of the captains, and I would ask the captains to please, as you buy stuff, keep the receipts. Keep the receipts, total them up, list what it was for, provide them to Sue, and we will get those submitted from the county to the state. It probably will not be till after the caucus, and we'll get them all totaled up, and I'm hoping that everything's going to be covered in full. I can't promise that, but it does look like we're going to have more cash than expected at the state level to reimburse the counties.
What do we need receipts for?
So that I can list your in-kind contribution, because you're not getting a check for that question.
What's the receipt?
All right.
Just
Yes.
quick update from the state office. Just want you guys to know the state office
GOP, but information about where you told about your refund from
Reports and amendments.
All right. Well, this video could keep going on longer, and I think it's almost hit 30 minutes. So I'm going to be posting up a link to these as well, to the original video. This was on Idaho Dispatch. I am trying to upload it on YouTube and also the Substack so that you can have transcriptions to watch these. All right, have a good one. Bye-bye.